I wanted to introduce you to my dear friend, Harri Aalto. I've known Harri and his family many years, and I feel so grateful that he is here in the same community. We live in the same community. And even though Harri's focus is not so much specifically energy healing, the focus is far more at the foundation or the basis that's behind all of energy healing. So I just knew that you would love to hear what he has to say about the awakening process, the evolution of consciousness, higher states of consciousness. It's just such a fascinating field. Harri's got a couple of books you can check out. One is called The Landscape of Enlightenment, is available on Amazon. Profoundly Personal, Universal Consciousness is profoundly personal. And Harri also has been offering workshops for people for decades and meets with people regularly, many times a week. He meets with lots of people, and people have such amazing awakening experiences in Harri's group. So I encourage you to check him out.
It's this whole thing about having groups and talking to people. It was, it kind of grew organically. I knew a couple years ago, I still know a couple years ago, and we were sitting in the living room, the dining room, and we got up, we were finished. It's a couple that I've known a long time, and we were walking to the living room, and I just out of nowhere said something like, it didn't mean anything. This is not some Mahavakya, a great word of wisdom. I just blurted out, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And this lady, she froze right there. Her eyes got big. Something happened to her. So we continued to the living room, and we sat down, and I looked at her. I said, "Sue, what happened?" She says, "What did you do, Harri?" "I didn't do anything, honest." And she says, "My consciousness expanded. It felt like infinity, like I have arrived at home." I was way more surprised than her, all right? And, well, my first thought was, let's see if it lasts. Maybe it's just a flashy experience and it comes and it goes. She came back to town and we visited, and she's from Canada, incidentally. She came down to Fairfield. And she said, still there, it just keeps growing. Now it's been 12 years or so, and she's into all kinds of experiences now. So I had this thought, if just from saying little words randomly, and we've been talking for a while about higher states of consciousness, I said, if we can just talk about it on the understanding level, and that can have such a profound effect, maybe I should start slightly bigger groups or expand my groups. The husband of this lady who's had experiences his whole life, flashy this and flashy that, divine experiences, all kinds of unity, everything. But he never felt that he was awake. And he told me, well, I meditate every day, hours and hours, and I have all kinds of experiences. And my wife, who, hardly meditates ever, and she doesn't have many experiences. She wakes up and I don't. Do you think that's fair? He was kind of joking, but not really. How come she woke up and I didn't? I said, right. Listen, I've told you, we've met many times, and I've told you, you have flashy experiences, but they come and they go. What isn't there? Some connectedness, something stable. He says, okay. He kind of got it. And then in the next so many months, he also went through a transformation. And I've seen this happening more and more and more. And as a consequence, many people are very similar. Almost everybody has more experience than they think. Way more. It's way more stable. And it just has to be acknowledged. I had another person I talked to, and he's going through this transformational experience. And he used this term. He says, at first I had to look for it, and I tried to find pure consciousness. I tried to find it. I couldn't find the silence of the self. I couldn't find it. And then he said, I didn't look for it anymore. I just started noticing it. Noticing it. Didn't have to do anything. He just started and he said, as soon as I didn't make any effort to find the self, it was there. It was noticeable. Isn't that a nice way to put it?
It's beautiful.
This fellow's from Lithuania. He's a young guy, And, maybe 40 years old. For me, that's very young, right? But in any case, that's happening more and more and more. So I said, how about we just start groups and they're only based on understanding of what experience you already have, whatever technique you're doing or not doing. I think that because self-awareness is universal, it's there, it's abstract, it's the basic nature of yourself. Why don't you know it's there?
So,
Quite often.
Harry, if you were going to describe your process, right? Like you have the groups and you help people by little saying little statements that kind of seem to activate or awaken their experience of the self and their higher states of consciousness. Would you say that there's like a mechanism that goes on there, or how do you see like your role, like what you do, like how would you describe what you do?
Most of the people who come to my groups, they do some kind of spiritual practice, okay? And mostly some kind of successful, whether it's TM or some other kind of practice, they do something.
Mm-hmm.
They meditate, they pray, whatever they do, they already have some vague sense of. And over the years, I have developed what kind of intuitive process, let's call it, how to bring out the experience. Because the realized state has two aspects to it that are equally important. One is you have some kind of experience, some kind of silence, some kind of inner stillness. But if you have it, but you don't know it, you don't understand it, you don't accept it, it's not there. You can't notice it, you can't find it. So what I bring onto the table is a kind of, it's a very subtle thing because everybody already has it, so I can't take any credit, or not much anyway. Nobody can help taking some credit, all right? But basically, I slowly, what? Like a shepherd leading somebody to water, and the lake is already there. Just have a drink. And then I describe it. And many people will say something like, they'll come to a group meeting and says, well, I have something, I have some. They'll usually say, well, I'm not awake. That's why I'm here. I'm not self-realized. And I'll say, sure. And they say, yeah, I'm totally sure. So you don't have any stillness or any, oh, I got that, they'll say.
Right, right.
They'll say, I got that. I got some still. What do you think that is? Usually they'll say, well, it's very natural, simple. It's just there. And, well, the self is very natural, very simple, and it's just there. And I go on from there and I describe the process. And I'd say the vast majority of people, after maybe 5 meetings, 10 meetings, whatever, some practice involved, and they start getting it.
That's so beautiful. So to me, this is what it sounds like to me, and you can let me know if I'm
Oh,
on
yeah,
track with it,
absolutely.
is that you're helping to create a, a kind of a lexicon or a verbal structure. You
Yes,
describe to them their experience, and that when you describe it, they're able to accept and embrace that description and start to define their own experiences in terms of these phrases or descriptive words that you've presented them with. It simplifies the abstract nature of
absolutely.
those experiences.
Beautifully put. And it's much easier for me now after doing this for years because there's other awake, making no claims, but there's awake people in the group, not just me. There's all kinds of people, and they're speaking about it this way, and they're speaking about it this way, and and when people listen to that, they don't have to believe me, but they'll believe 5 or 6 or 7 people who are describing similar feeling, and they'll, whoa, if that person has it, surely I have something like that, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure it's validating too,
It's
because
validating. That's the word. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, you probably help people appreciate the experiences they're having, even though they might downplay them in their own minds.
Everybody does that. Everybody, because what? Did anybody remember when they were trained in school, high school, public school, anybody ever used the word self realization? Oh, come on. We
Right.
have no training. I didn't have, nobody does, right? No training. No, you have to start from scratch. You get the feeling that there's so much change, so much up and down, so much turmoil in the world. Is there something better for me? So you become a seeker. What are you seeking for? You don't really know. You're just looking for happiness or contentment or anything other than change. And so you become a seeker and you join this group or that group, and you find people who appear, or at least appear to understand the process, that there is more. There is a stable, non-changing field of consciousness that everybody has. They're just not noticing it.
Harry, I think a lot of my listeners often associate the experience of higher states of consciousness with flashy experiences. And I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit to the difference between, or like how do the like really incredible, like, expanded experiences, how do they kind of fit in or play into that process of that awakening?
That's a great question, but so I have people join this group. They, if they have flashy experiences, they'll say, "Well, 10 years ago, I had this fantastic experience. The whole universe was in me. Whatever, whatever." I said, "So where is it now?" "Oh, it's gone. It's not there anymore." "Oh, doesn't that tell you something?" And they say, "Yeah, it does." Flashy experiences are great. They're certainly indicative of a ground state. Something stable is there that's allowing this kind of stuff to come out. But flashy experiences are pretty far away from the first state of realization, which is very simple, very natural. Everybody can have it. You don't need flashy experiences. You don't even need much of an intellect, but you do have to have 2 ears and a head, and be human beings. We're uniquely configured to have self-realization. It's difficult not to have it. That's the
That's
natural
so
state of
beautiful.
human life, right? I
Yeah,
know
it's
you
beautiful.
agree, Dorothy,
Oh,
right?
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm wondering if the flashy experiences or the experience, like you described so beautifully, like the whole universe was in me and
Yeah,
all
yeah.
that, or I saw God or whatever, um, are somehow associated with the condition of the nervous system or the senses of perception. And you said something really fascinating. Harry and I, you guys are friends, and we talk on the phone sometimes
Oh,
too.
yeah.
You said something the other day when we were on the phone together that kind of stuck with me. It was very interesting about something about how the process of the refinement of the senses is like one of the phases that the awareness does go through in the process of reaching that more awakened state. But I think it flashed by pretty quickly. So I'd love it. I'd love to hear a little more detail about that. Because again, I appreciate that you're putting the concept or the idea of like reaching for or grabbing for flashy experiences is really not the best orientation for a person to have a fully awakened experience. And yet it's still like it still like plays
They're
in a
tied
little bit,
together.
right?
For some people, everybody's different. Some people kind of ooze into self-realization step by step. They hardly know it. Somebody comes along and say, "Well, do you have it all the time?" "Yeah, yeah, it's there all the time. When your eyes are open, you're acting. It's there." "Yeah, yeah, it's there all the time, 24 hours a day." Well, that's a description of the beginning, one of the beginning stages, and it's not even a stage. It's finally a permanent experience. It's called self-realization historically, as long as it's there all the time. That's it. You don't have to have now. Flashy experiences, I must say, I've certainly had flashy experience throughout my life. Okay, and but I came to the realization, since they're coming and going, I wanted something to be permanent. Now, states of consciousness. Let's say you wake up, you get the ground state. You gotta have that. You gotta have the earth for the trees to grow and the flowers to blossom, right? Let's call pure consciousness the ground state. After that, there are other states of consciousness, keep going on and on and on. And, you know, these flashy experiences become your normal experience, or can become your normal. So they're just normal experiences. You accept them, they're there, they're part of the wholeness of the self, the totality of experience. But you have to get to the first stage first. And that's easy. That's easy. And once you get there, the second step is easier. And the third, there's so many organizations talk about, you're going to get to this no self experience and there's nothing there and it's great and it's wonderful because it doesn't change. I agree with that, but it's just the first step. It's the
Right.
ground step, and it's not empty. It's ready to be filled with what? With everything. So, like
Oh,
that,
it's beautiful. That's beautiful.
right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So there's some, because it's a gradual process, then there's some adaptation that takes place. And do you feel that that adaptation is something that requires some conscious intention in the, like the belief system, I guess? Or, I mean, from an energy healing perspective, my tendency is to think that there's also some physiological adaptation, but which I'm sure there is. But I'd love to hear from your perspective, like how you see that, how people adapt to the progression of higher states of consciousness.
Well, obviously, or at least obvious to me, is that, if you meditate or you do a spiritual practice, you close your eyes, you sit quietly, it's altering the physiology. You're getting rid of fatigue, you're getting rid of misconceptions, and it's happening automatically if you're doing a proper technique, right? And Dorothy helps people with that process too. But it's very, very simple. Eyes closed, meditating or any kind of prayer or anything that works begins to purify the body. But the purpose of all that activity is, you're doing something. You're doing a technique. It's like if you want to get strong, you lift weights, right? You
Right.
want to get spiritually expanded, you meditate or do some practice. But the purpose is to get a result. And that result is exhibited in daily activity. And you asked me about the senses, which I kind of ignored, but I can go into that a little bit. Okay. So, we've all lived our lives, helter skelter, in the many of the misconceptions about self realization have to do with relative life, regular life. Okay. Regular life nearly always hides the self because you're so involved. There's nothing but what you're looking at, what you're talking, who you're talking to. The only thing that changes in self-realization is that mechanic of living normal life stays, but the self is there as well. The knowledge of the self, or the knowingness of the self, or the sight of the self, it depends on the person. That's the only change, but that change is monumental because you now have something very stable in your life. Very stable. That's what's missing in the relative for your experiences, that it's changing, changing, changing. I need to have more and more and more. Doesn't matter what you get, you want more, right?
Right.
It's not that the relative is going to go away. You're going to begin to enjoy it more. It's going to find its own value, which is also related to the self, right? So I'm not in any way ever advocating that there's an inside experience and an outside experience and they're separate. They never have anything to do with each other. Growth of consciousness has to do with a unification, with a connectedness, with love and what? The feeling level of life in physical life and normal life, emotional life becomes stable, just as stable as the self.
Beautiful. So is the principle that the individual then experiences that quality of the self as a feeling in the body, or a feeling rather than, because it's subtle, right? So it's not so much like the experience is, oh, I'm reminding myself that I'm awake to myself. It's not like on an intellectual level, right? It's like more
It's
like
just there
baked in.
and you know it, yes. Um, Of course, the subtlest value of human consciousness is a feeling, right? Its feelings are very, but that's not devoid of a knowingness. They're kind of one and the same thing ultimately. By that I mean is that if you feel good because you have the stable knowledge or the stable knowingness state and you're acting and that stable state is there, then you feel good. You
Mm,
feel stable. It doesn't mean the relative is going to disappear. The process of living life continues. It just gets added value to it because there's something stable, and you're walking through, talking through, looking through that stability now. Same relative, but you're living this stable, knowing this. Ah, I am eternal and infinite. Maybe you don't put it into words like that, but eventually it begins to feel like that.
I love that.
Here is the relative. Here's my body. I'm living a normal life. The bigger picture becomes normal.
Yes. Beautiful. Beautiful. You said something really interesting, that this goal ends up being exhibited during daily activity.
Absolutely. In fact, I'm sorry, did I interrupt
No,
you?
no, that was all. Yeah, go.
You know, I was always, even as a little kid, I was greedy for more. I wanted more experience. I wanted flashier experience, but I really wanted was happiness and stability. That's what even as a kid, that's what I wanted, because I had flashes all the time, and I wanted more of that. I wanted more and more of this stable. But then I was a crazy, active little kid too. I was having these periods where something would come on me and I became very stable while running around like a chicken, you know? But it didn't last as a kid. It came and it went every day a little bit here and there. And I came to the conclusion that this feeling of contentment that sits in the self, it's just there. This feeling of stability is by far the most important facet of life. Okay. And it kind of developed into it sort of like use my eyes, use my ears as I was growing up. I got used to the fact that you could call the self kind of like a container that filled up with more stability. You know, it's just an analogy, okay? And it filled up with the relative, and it filled up with this, and it filled and how did it fill up? It filled up with connectedness and a unified feeling that even the relative, which is kind of heavy duty, you know, right? Um, was part of the self. Your family first, and then your friends, and it goes on and on from there, right? It's a feeling, really. You could call, I sometimes call self-realization love realization. I know that's easy for you to say, but it's not that easy for a guy to say, okay? But that's what it feels like, right?
Yes. But sometimes I like to use the word the lap of God, because it reminds me of a feeling that seems to dominate during the deep sleep state, that there's a sense of resting in this eternal, unconditional wholeness,
Yeah,
absolute love.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's what it feels like, because that which hides the self also reveals the self.
Oh, beautiful.
That's
That's beautiful.
right. And that is whatever your misconceptions are, whatever your understanding is, whatever you think the relative is, whatever you think, all of that has been hiding the self because you have misconceptions, you don't kind of get it, you want it to be super flashy, you want something wonderful to happen, and you don't want the relative to get in the way. Maybe the relative should go away. No, the relative is the means by which you do your spiritual practices, whatever they are, and then you act. Those qualities that you get in the silence of the self and the silence of meditation begin to pervade the relative. The relative gets enhanced and begins to be understood to be what? Part of the wholeness of life. Not something out there, but something in here and out there. You could call it kind of a unified sense begins to grow after the initial state comes, which is just the self.
Oh, that's beautiful. It's so beautiful, because I think this is another area where I think people get confused a little bit sometimes, is they think that, well, I have to perform subtle actions. Like the way that I'm going to sort of evolve or develop my consciousness is by doing, well, energy healing, among other things, is a very kind of subtle action. It's not out there washing the dishes or something. I mean, for me, when I wash the dishes, there's also purification happening.
Of course.
It's at all the levels at the same time. But I think what you said, it was so brilliant. It just struck something inside of me, that when integration is there all across the spectrum of the self, then every layer of the physiology is engaged in action, which supports the deeper and deeper integration of the relationship with the divine. And every action like has this whole field of subtle support behind it because it's happening deep and it's happening in the middle and it's happening all the way to the top.
It's beautiful because you can't, well, first of all, you have to have a physiology to have any experience.
That's right. That's right.
You can't have any experience without that. That's obvious. But the heart and the mind and the body, they're interrelated very, very, very deeply, right? As you know, as a healer. And that's what I certainly see. The thing to remember is you don't have to have a great intellect to wake up. In fact, it can even get in the way sometimes. You just think too much because the state is very simple and misconceptions are there, ideas are there, physical restraints might be there, but none of the self doesn't really care about any of that stuff. It's just in there anyway. And it's not in there, it's everywhere because it's universal. And so any kind of person, intellectual person, a physical person, emotional person, doesn't matter. Hey, you rise to self-realization from not self-realization. That means you've got some stuff going on in your life that you maybe want to diminish, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Right? Everybody has that. Otherwise, you're not on a process. And at some point, it's not that those things totally disappear, but they find a place in a bigger environment. So they don't overshadow you the way they used to. They don't what? Impede your life. Okay? So let's say you have some misconceptions and you wake up. What happened to those misconceptions? To some degree, they faded so that you can see through that misconception. But because maybe it's your natural tendency to be a doubting kind of person, but the self is there anyway. So that moves to the side a little bit, that those doubts, enough so that you can continue to have the self. The stress or the misconception becomes, it's the same size, it's just in a bigger container. So it has less influence like that.
Oh, so beautiful. And could we say that then one is able to a little more witness all of the relative metrics by which they have judged and known themselves through the
Absolutely.
course of their life, so
Absolutely.
they can, as they're witnessing it, then all of a sudden it all comes into perspective.
A bigger heart, a bigger mind also means that environmental influence, good, bad, and indifferent, overshadow less and less. They don't hide the self the way they used to. In fact, they begin to reveal the self.
Oh yeah, that's so brilliant. It's so
Isn't
brilliant.
that isn't that what happens?
Yes.
That's what's happened to your life, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it happens in energy healing a lot. It's one of the, like, in a way, we could almost say that's sort of the fundamental shift in energy healing,
That's right.
is that the issues that were causing people pain and suffering all of a sudden become the instruments by which they rise to a higher level of self, really true self understanding.
That's right.
They know
Yeah.
themselves. Yeah.
I have this on another group. There's this other guy. He's highly intellectual. He's one of those genius types. He belongs to these organizations that collect
Mensa.
genius and put them in a bucket, whatever. But in any case, he's brilliant. He knows everything about consciousness on the mental level. And it's taken a little while for his intellect to settle down long enough to see that the intellect doesn't have to go anywhere, but it does have to take a back seat to the self, in a sense, up until the self is stable enough that even this enormous thinking process he has can be a little more quiet, a little more heartfelt. And we're all different. We approach self-realization from where we are and who we are, with our feeling level, with our intellectual capacity, whatever that might be. And if you put 10 people in a room who are awake and ask them, what is this? What is this wakefulness that you claim to have? They'll all describe it differently. But they're describing the same thing, but they're describing it in their own way. One person says, well, I don't really need to talk about it. I just have it. I own it. It's mine. You can't have it. No, I'm just kidding. But another person will go into a thing. Yeah, it's silence. It's always there. It's this, it's that. Another person will say, well, there's a divine level to it. But the main quality all of them will describe is that there's a self-same contentment and universality to the experience. You won't recognize it on the surface. They'll all look different. One guy will have long hair and dress like a hippie. The other person will, be a businessman with a suit and tie. Doesn't make any difference.
It's really beautiful. And it reminds me a little bit of a, a spot where some of the Eastern understandings meet the Western understandings.
Yes.
In the Western understandings, there's this idea that everyone's healing path is going to be different. Everybody has like a different index of aspects of their own nature that need to heal. And that story is going to be very, very different for each person. And each person's relationship with the divine is going to be very, very different from the next. And it's not like one is better than the other, but only that each one is intimate. And that kind of reminds me a little bit of I'm fascinated by I'm familiar with the Landscape of Enlightenment book that you wrote, but I'm not as familiar with the Profoundly Personal book. And I'm wondering if you could describe a little more. We could go a little bit more in that direction and explore a little bit more how the uniqueness of everyone's experience is also somehow intimately connected to the universal nature of the ultimately of the goal.
Well, the first book is a little bit more personal, more personal anecdotes and this and that, but the same knowledge, I give quite a lot of experiences in that first book, both of a expanded value, but also of physical life, what it was like as a kid and all that. The second book is a little more information, knowledge based, same phenomenon, but not quite as personal. But I'm a really big advocate of individuality, because who the heck is having any experience, whether it's enlightenment or ignorance? It's always an individual. It's always somebody. It's not anybody else's experience, it's your experience. So that individuality. So what happens to individuality as you wake up? It blossoms like every other area of life, that's all. You could even become more of an individual, not less. Whoa. And
I love that.
and if you're a personality, you're charismatic, this and that, prior to waking up, you'll be that afterwards too. Only you'll know how to express it better, and maybe not hurt people as much or whatever. And now if you're a very quiet, introverted kind of guy or girl, that'll be there too. When I was in high school, I was very, very shy. You wouldn't get me on a meeting like this if you paid me. And I got to a point in my evolution or my expansion where I noticed that when I talked to people, it helped me. When I talked to people and they responded to me, I liked it. Something happened to me. So in a group, I encourage people to talk, because one thing I've noticed, let's say you got 12 people in a room, and you're on Zoom like this, but there's 12 people. The people who begin to express their feelings and their ideas and their experience and their silence tend to stabilize that silence almost to the degree that they express it. Almost to that degree, they begin to believe their own experience. They put it into the relative. Another person will say, well, yeah, I got that too. Yeah. But that somehow that transformation from the silent inside to the expressed outside in a group tends to enhance the experience of the stillness. So that happens to me too when I'm in a group.
That is so beautiful.
Yeah. Usually they can't shut me up, but I do have to let people talk, which I do. And that exchange is bringing the what? The stability of the inside and whatever misconceptions you have, they almost disappear because you're expressing something deeper than them. Those misconceptions. And misconceptions or misunderstandings are probably one of the biggest obstacles. And of course, the physiology has to have some kind of stability to it, but you have to go to
Yeah, well,
Barbara.
the physiology, imbalances in the physiology are always reflections of
Of course, they're
misunderstandings of the
one and the
intellect
same
and,
thing. Yeah.
yeah, the deeper levels. It's very interesting, your point, that it would be one thing to stand in a room all alone, all by yourself, and speak out what was the inner experience versus being in a group and speaking out the experience. It's something I also experience, and I find it absolutely fascinating that it feels a little bit like viewing my own experience through the eye of a fly, with multiple facets, and
That's
that
right.
each
Yeah, yeah.
person,
That's
right?
beautiful. Yeah, that's wonderful.
And isn't it because as the consciousness expands, there's a level of empathetic um, association with the whole field around, so that if somebody's in my group and they're witnessing what I'm saying, then I'm getting to see what I'm saying from my perspective, but I'm also getting to see it from their perspective. And so it's like having multiple eyes open looking at the same point.
That's beautiful. That's exactly right. And uh, what begins to happen, people, they tend to experience the self. They could call it, they have it inside. It's not really inside, but let's say the first stage is kind of, you could call it, you understand that you're living in the space of the self, or the space of silence, or the space of this knowingness. But then in that state for a little while, some months, a year or two, what happens is that you begin to realize that you're looking at something, and it feels a little bit like you're looking in a mirror. You're looking at, say, that bookcase over there. There's some kind of connection, some kind of unity, or you're looking at your wife or your friend or something, and you say, wait a minute, this feels very intimate to me, just the feeling. What's really beginning to happen, that the space between your inside and your outside is beginning to unify. It's not changing the relative, it's just changing your perspective and your deep understanding that, wait a minute, the relative is, oh, it's not the relative at all. It's really a mirror of the self. And that's what you're saying about these facets, right? These facets, you almost feel like, wait a minute, how am I related to the space I'm living in? It's like sitting in this room, right? Until I say, or have the feeling, okay, I say room, so I look around, yeah, there's a room, but there's this space in the room, right? Up
Yes.
until then, I didn't even think that I was in the room. I'm in the space of the room. But you don't have the space of the room without that wall, that ceiling. You just have the space. Take that away, and you're in the great outdoors. That's kind of like what begins to happen. Think of it this way: you got the self. First stage is very abstract. You can hardly find what. Is this my experience? I guess it is because I'm having it, but it's very abstract. It's unbounded, but it's only unbounded because there's no boundaries. It's not like it's vast. It's just a feel. And then let's say you're in a dark room. That would be ignorance. And you turn up the rheostat a wee bit, and then you look around. Wait a minute. This room isn't empty. There's something. I'm in a room. Turn it up 10%. Oh, there's pictures on the wall. There's this. There's that. And and then you turn it up to 50%, and you can see all the whole room, and the space of the room becomes more real, and so does the defining values of the room. That's kind of like consciousness. At first it's very abstract, and it's somehow some of the misconceptions disappear, some of the understandings, you settle down, the physiology gets calmer. It's like an internal rheostat turns on, and you begin to see what that abstraction is actually full of. It's full
Oh,
of the
Harry.
self. It's full of the self. So it's not foreign to you. You just begin to accept your physical life, your emotional life, and you become united with it. bit by bit as the rheostat turns up.
One of the things I'm getting from what you're saying is that that experience is so personal and so intimate that it allows the individual to feel safe in
Yes,
that space. And it's that feeling of trust and safety that supports the freedom of the individual to start to explore a little bit, to turn up the rheostat a little bit more, right?
yes,
That because the very nature of that first fundamental step
that's
is
right.
one of a connection to that source of creation that is all loving, all knowing, all pure resource and adoration and so forth,
Yes,
then that feeling of trust. Because like I find working with people who have illnesses and problems, one of the things that happens is their hearts get covered with a lack of trust, and
that's right.
they'll shut down a little bit in their feeling level, and the net result is then they find themselves unable to move forward in their reality on the level of consciousness, on the level that matters. They may be very successful in the relative, but if
Oh,
they
yeah.
can't move forward inside, they become very unhappy and uncomfortable, and their bodies become uncomfortable. And so somehow that there's something in that, the nature of that first step of relationship, that's extremely nourishing and makes a person feel safe and secure and able to take the next step.
That's completely right. If a person all by himself, he's got no knowledge, or she's got no very little knowledge, and is not part of a group, and pure consciousness suddenly dawns on them, it would be like, what is this space? It could be slightly scary, even, okay?
Yes,
Because, whoa, this is a big space. What is it? You might even shut it out.
that's
In a
right. That's
group,
right.
in a group, somebody says, "Yeah, that's the self," and the person will say, "Whoa, really? So it's good?" Yeah, but somebody had to tell that person that. Actually, that's where the knowledge comes in. Isn't that
Do you
interesting?
think that because somebody tells them, and so that the validation is coming a little bit from an environmental position, it's as if when they have the space, they have the potential to expand their awareness and to take in a sort of empathetic way the experiences of their environment. And then when the environment is able to reflect back to them, oh, yes, yes, this is actually very good, then it's as if they have a moment of witnessing their own experience, and the witnessing value is validated through
That's
that.
right.
Is it? I mean, I'm just kind of conjecturing.
No, no, that's completely right. There's this other guy, good friend of mine, long time, very good experiences, had no stabilized good experience, but no knowledge and no acceptance that that could be anything to do with self-realization. And we're sitting in our living room here, and Kathy, my wife, knows this couple as well. She put up her finger like this and went like this, like a school marm, and she said, "You don't feel you deserve self-realization. Isn't that true?" And she just wagged her finger. And this guy, who's I've known for 30 years, went into a state of unified consciousness. Big by first he said, "Whoa," and he accepted that, and he said, "Yeah, you're right. There's this obstacle. I've always felt I don't deserve what everybody's describing as this wonderful state." And he went into that wonderful state, and he's been there ever since.
Oh, that's so
Isn't
beautiful.
that?
That's so beautiful.
So I tried that once in a while. It doesn't work for me as well as it did for her, by the wagging of the finger, but the principle is the same.
Yes, that so in a sense, what you're saying is that the individual at that point restructures the sense, if they're restructuring the sense of their own deservability, they're restructuring also their perception of themselves, their definition, their
Absolutely.
self-definition.
This self definition, if you define yourself properly, you're awake. And if you define yourself a little bit less than properly, you're on the way. And
Oh, that's so interesting.
if you define yourself not at all, then you're in ignorance. You're not even a seeker.
Oh,
But
Harry, that is beautiful. That is beautiful. So here's my question, because I've looked at this because it obviously ties into energy healing.
oh,
And
it's the same process.
yeah, is that if one is willing to give up the individualized self-definition and adopt the definition through the lens of the divine. So it's not how I define myself, but it's how God defines me. That definition is one that opens all the doors.
Can I add just one thing to that?
Oh, please.
Okay, no, it's perfect what you said, but it is giving up the individual, let's call it the limited definition rather than the individual definition, because ultimately the individuality also begins to accept self-realization, right?
Absolutely.
Okay, so the individual gets to a level that don't have a limited definition anymore. They accept the fact that the self is unbounded and that there is, if we want to go there, we can talk about the divine levels a little bit too. You know, some people have those experiences, but you know, I could look at it a little bit. You could, if you read my books, there's a lot of that kind of stuff in there, which is fine, but there's simple stuff too. The pure consciousness or human life there's this fundamental level, silence, stillness. It's not totally silent. Silence is overrated because it's not really silence. It's an experience. Therefore, there's somebody having that silence. So it's lively. There's a knowledge level or a knowingness level to that silence. Therefore, it's not just pure silence.
Right. It's experienced through the filter of the nervous system.
That's right. Okay, so that's one level. And then there's another level that knowingness, because it's a knowingness, it's also kind of a knowledge. There's a form level, there's a divine level. It's also the unboundedness, the silence is universal. The knowledge level is universal, it's everywhere. Then there's this divine level. You could call it the laws of nature if you like. Those laws of nature were defined by this knowingness level. This divine level has forms. Some people see these forms, some people live these forms, but it's only one level. It's a beautiful level, but it's still one level. So there's the divine level, and there's you could, let's call it personifications there. The laws of nature are personified. It's also universal. These laws of nature make the universe, make the physical world inside and outside. And that's what, you know, you don't have to see these levels. I'm just describing them, okay? So another layer is the physical world you live in. That doesn't stop at this wall or at this society or at the boundary of the earth or even the stars. It goes on and on. It's also infinite. All of these layers are possible to be experienced in expanded states of consciousness because they fill up the container of the self with everything. And then the question might arise, who made all this stuff? Is there a goddess? Is there a god? Do they exist? That would be the next question. Let's say you're living in the mansion of the universe now. Whoever created the universe, it would behoove them to come and check out who's living in his and her universe. And that's exactly what happens. There you go. That's the range. It's possible for everybody.
It's so beautiful. It's so beautiful. Yeah, there've been a lot of, we just have a lot of discussions around our house on heavy topics. So religion, politics, this sort of heavy
Oh, of
topics.
course.
But one of the points is that in Western religion, God comes to man. God comes to man. I mean, also in Eastern has its traditions of like Krishna and Rama coming like that, incarnations or avatars of God. But in the Western, Jesus is God. Like it's like full 100%. Like I think Krishna was something like 15% God or something like that. And obviously Rama was divides into 4 parts and all that. So, but it's one event that happened 2000 years ago. But once the event took place, which was kind of a seismic spiritual transformation that was created on earth at that time, it doesn't really end at that point. Once it's happened, once God has come to man, then God is always sort of like present. Jesus comes to people all the time. Like people in the Western religion, they see Jesus comes to them, and all kinds of, oh, I've had so much fun on YouTube watching all these wonderful people videotape where these phenomenal events occur during Eucharists and stuff, and all this light is flashing all over the place. It shouldn't be possible to pick up with a video camera, but it is. People are seeing all this and the transformations of the Eucharist, all kinds of phenomenal things that happen. It's just really interesting, and it's really beautiful that God does come to man, and God now continues to come to man, continues over this course of time. It's been 2000 years. It's very interesting because I feel that it has the fact that God can come to man has in its nature, that action has in its nature some values that break apart all the internal assumptions and judgments and expectations and sort of limiting beliefs. Anyway, I'm wondering what the role of the breaking apart of all those limitations plays in the facilitation of the relationship with God.
But every culture has their own version of God.
Mm-hmm.
And, you could say it started 2,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago or started with the birth of this earth. You don't know. Human consciousness can only go so far. But I tend to look at all the gods and all the goddesses as related, totally 100% related. And certainly everything you said is correct and nice and true. It's kind of like human beings, they get enlightened and they go to this stage and then they go to this stage and then they go, this is kind of like lifting the spiritual weights. You do all the work and then at some point, let's say you're at the supreme value of the senses and understanding and love and connectedness. At that point, all you have to do is wait for God. God comes now. God moves into your life. God moves into your life. And it isn't kind of the end. The thing to remember, okay, so the first appearances of God or goddess can be very ecstatic and wonderful and this and that. I went through that years and years ago. That's always in my life. You wouldn't have wanted to meet me 40 years ago when I was going through this because I was just in bliss all the time. Okay. But that settled down. But it's still there. But it settled down. It became more natural. So every stage of consciousness, you might go through a flashy period and an experience of great expansion and this and so forth. And oh, whoa, this is great, great. But when it settles down, it's still there. And every stage is more settled, more big, more full, more, and even the presence of God becomes a natural experience, a simple experience that she is just there all the time. And that's far more fulfilling than just the self, but you still have to, and what you really discover at the self isn't much different from God. It's just personified now.
That's interesting. Yes.
Right? You manage to go to an expanded value of consciousness where you actually see the absolute, the supreme value of the absolute, but you also see the supreme value of the relative. You see both, and they become one. You remain the experiencer. If you didn't, there'd be nothing there. You remain the experiencer.
I'm wondering in your groups, as people evolve to higher levels of consciousness, what is the role of purification? And I would say the obliteration, is that too big of a word? Or maybe the dissolving of limiting beliefs and understandings in that process. Because this was sort of inspired by the discussion that we're having about God,
Yeah.
is that in that presence of God, there's it seems as if the nature is to simplify the entire field of perception so that a lot of the structures that we normally think of as the basic scaffolding that allows us to uphold our relationship with the relative tends to shift in its nature to a certain degree. And that can be, for some people, that can be kind of unsettling.
Certainly, in the early days of any new state, there's something that's why groups are so
Mm-hmm.
fortifying, because other people go through the same things you go through, I go through. And, when I was a kid, I started having maybe 9 or 10. I got God obsessed for a few years, and I wanted to meet God.
How adorable.
Okay, well, I did. And what happened, I was living in a field of some kind of light in those days, and my feeling was, if God is a field of light, then I'm disappointed if that's all God is. Okay, and as I want to see God, I want to know He, she exists. I always had this he, she thing going too. I couldn't see just one. I always saw a combination of two, and I asked myself questions like, well, okay, so God exists. I believe that, and I understand it, and I've had some sense of it. But who made God? And who made God? Who made God? I have questions like that, and I wanted the answers to those questions. And it took a while to get those answers, but they eventually came. Nobody made God. God's eternal, infinite, uncreated. Now, since we're on this big esoteric level, we can pursue it for a little while, but so are we. We're uncreated too. And why? Because we're united to God. We're the same phenomenon, but on a point value or a smaller value, let's say. We hold as much God in us as we can. God can know us, but we can't know God fully. Not fully, but quite a bit, quite a bit. So
We can know God as far as the capacity of the human structure allows us to know,
that's
to
right.
the extent that the human nervous system and human senses of perception are able to exploit their potential to know God. But at some point, I would then assume that the limitations, the natural limitations inherent in the human condition, will drive the soul once that potential has been fully exploited to seek another form of physiology that's even has an even greater capacity to know even more deeply.
That's true. And in our groups, I get into that from time to time. But you could say we have to come to Earth
Yeah, I mean, there's no
to
point if
come here.
if we're still dealing with this level, we need to do this level until we've done this level. Yeah.
But all these states of consciousness, I don't know if I want to go there, but I could for a second. Okay, there's eternal value, infinite value to human consciousness, which also has a form. In Eastern terminology, it's called the Atman. It's your cosmic form. That's different, or totally similar to this, but here I am sitting in a little chair in a little room in a little village, right? The Atma value is everywhere, but it also has a form. That form can go closer to God. I think we should come to Earth now, don't you?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, but no, they're fascinating subjects, and human consciousness has the ability to go into all these levels, and people do come to on these meetings who have these experiences and ask these questions. But the primary question is how do I wake up? How do I get this uh, ground base on which everything that you're talking about can sprout up? It's pretty simple.
Right, because once that's established, then
All this
essentially
other,
the
yeah,
system will roll on its own, won't it?
that's exactly
Essentially.
right. It rolls on its own because you were meant to go there. It's the laws of nature, the aspects of nature just give you the momentum naturally.
I was going to say the laws of nature support it because,
That's
and
right.
that leads me back to a little question that I was thinking of earlier too, is if you were going to define what the goal or the purpose of the human existence is, how would you define that?
If you take a really universal angle on that question, then human consciousness is capable of accepting everything as the self, everything. And that's a state of bliss, a state of knowledge, and a state of stillness of the self, all rolled into one. You become the stable cosmic human being. And on that level, nothing can upset you anymore. Nothing, because you are everything. You're not going to
That's
upset yourself
beautiful.
anymore.
But
Like
then where is God in that picture?
God is a relationship you have.
Okay, that makes sense. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah, beautiful.
Always there.
Yeah.
It's you could, if you want to come to earth for a moment and connect it to the higher levels, it's like pure consciousness is there, that you can notice it at any time. God is the same way at some point, and God is there at there. You can notice them at any point. All those layers, the knowledge layer, this layer, this layer, this, all of them are there. You become a cosmic library to yourself, but you still can't win the lottery.
Right. Right. I
So there's
totally
limitations, okay?
absolutely.
Believe
Absolutely.
me, I would have won the lottery 50 times if I could have.
Right.
Everybody had, as soon as you get into that kind of situation, you can't upset other people's trajectory towards enlightenment. They got their dharmas and their karmas, and they're going to run through them. And you can't just suddenly say this and do this. Those aspects of nature um, are there. And yes, of course, miracles are possible, but to somebody who's creating a miracle, it's not a miracle. It's just a natural act.
Exactly. So part of that stepping into that place
Yes,
has to do with intimacy with the laws of nature, right? Because the laws of nature are what are kind of constraining and limiting the human experience. And as the intimacy with the laws of nature increases, then one is able to align up with the specific laws that give rise to specific effects.
that's right. And you get more and more free will because you're closer and closer to the hub of the wheel, let's say, and you could
Mhm.
say that God is in the hub of the wheel, or you are as well. And when you're in a field of more possibilities, then there's more freedom. It's that simple.
That's so interesting because it feels like because that state is very transcendental, we could
Yeah,
say, that not only is there more freedom, that your will, you find that your thoughts and your ideas kind of tend to just manifest sort of
that's right.
spontaneously, but also the path becomes more and more narrow too, right? Because it's greater and greater alignment with God's will, and God's will is very specific, right? So you can't just become degenerate or, I guess I'm kind of seeing both happening at the same time, that both the individual will is more and more expressed, but also the maybe the internal willingness to violate natural law is also greater, or let's say the internal willingness to violate natural law becomes more and more constrained, so that you just want to do the will of God, you just want to do the right thing.
You naturally want to support your environment, because if I talk nicely to you, you talk nicely to me. That, and it doesn't matter if you're a criminal, you want something come back to you that you like. Okay, so the laws of nature take care of that. Give you a little slap here and there, but eventually you begin to see, if you help your family and you help your friends and have an influence even on the divine level, those values start coming back to you. Hey, that's what we want, isn't it? We want more happiness, more love, more connectedness. And if we get that from the environment, it's pretty quick. You learn pretty quickly, you know, say the right
Absolutely.
thing and the right thing comes back. Say the wrong thing and the wrong thing comes back. It's pretty fast. You don't have to wait for it.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so simple. Well, Harry, I really appreciate being able to take this time, and just I really appreciate the the depth and the range of today's conversation, how we were able to really dig into some extremely abstract and fascinating areas, especially looking at how individual experience interfaces with the process of its own expansion. It's absolutely beautiful to hear it from your perspective. And, God bless you and thank you for all these years that you've given to this process. I'm wondering, before we end, if there's anything like specific, anything else you'd like to say, or if you'd like to, I don't know, read a little bit out of one of your books, or anything that strikes you that you'd like to add.
I'll read something, but what what really gets me and I love is that even in this time of tremendous turmoil in the world,
It so is, yes.
but it's also a time when why are so many people waking up?
Right. Exactly.
Honestly,
And also all the religious fields are just,
oh,
they're
they're
just, people are just
blossoming.
running towards religion like amazing.
And but I've always wondered, having had this experience, the experiences since a kid, and mostly thinking everybody had them up until I grew up a little bit, why everybody doesn't have it. And then the answer is everybody does have it. They don't get it, they don't understand it. So that really, even today, inspires me a lot. I started a new group of people, 14, 15 people, and some of your people have come onto that group, a number of them, and they seem to be doing great from one blinking meeting. And why? Hey, it's not me. It's the fact that the universal value of consciousness, particularly people who have done, are seekers and have gone into this field, somehow they don't understand it's that simple because life has been so complicated for everybody that complexity overrules. Where's the simple, and you get a sense of the self or silence. You say, well, that's not nothing, right? That's not really real. In fact, it's the only thing that is real, is the self, because everything rises from there. I just wanted to make that point, that simple point that anybody and everybody, since they already have the natural state of the self, can be very easily guided or encouraged or
Can have their experience validated.
have their experience validated. That's what I'm trying to say.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Through these
Let me
nice
see if
group
this is
experiences.
so. This is random. I hope it's appropriate. Chapter 13 in this book. I am in complete awe. That's the title. It is pure and personal happiness, finally, to realize and experience that I am, not only fundamentally, but also on every conceivable experiential level, nothing but utterly personal, utterly universal consciousness in the divine activity of my own awareness. And that there is no area of experience too dense, no range of consciousness so hidden as to be ever left behind, unexplored, or ignored by an all-pervading love, a self-luminous universality that is my own heart and everyone's heart. Right? I mean, I could go
Oh,
on, but that's nice, right?
absolutely beautiful. Absolutely so beautiful. So beautiful. So beautiful, especially, yes, especially
I,
in the light of all that we have discussed in today's session. I feel that all the discussion brought us to this point of perspective where you could read that and it really makes sense.
yeah.
So, for all my listening audience, I really hope that everybody just can maybe go back and watch this even more than once, because there's so much depth and richness of information and experience. And Harry, I got a lot out of today's session.
Okay.
And one of my favorite moments in today's session was when you were describing the simplicity of that first step. And I feel that your experience, your knowledge of it, and your experience of it is so stabilized that when you said the words, the entire presence of it came forward. And that was a gift.
Just from talking, just from talking and you were listening, right? And I get something from what you talk too. And, Dorothy and I are kind of working together these days a little bit more and more, which is nice. And I'd like to just put a little plug in for, anybody can join my groups. It doesn't matter. You just have to contact me, and it's easy. Look up my name and my email and contact me, and I'll talk to you and give you an opportunity to come onto one of my courses or sessions or whatever you want to call them.
Harry, that's beautiful. Is it okay with you if I put your contact information
Absolutely,
in the
please. I'd love you
in
to
the
do that.
description below the?
I'd
Okay,
love you to do
I'll do
that.
that.
Okay.
I'll
All right.
definitely do that.
All right. This was a joy for me too. I love it. And thank you for inviting me. It's very kind of you.
Well, Harry, it's the least I can do. You've been giving so much to so many people for so long. And Tom and I are loving your meetings. We look forward to them every week.
That's
Absolutely.
great. I love having you there because you're very, very knowledgeable, right? I bet you that you're going to get inundated by some of these people, they're going to start coming to you because everybody has specifics they want to deal with, right? All right.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're so welcome, Harry. Thank you too for coming on the show
All
and
right.
sharing all of your beautiful light and wisdom and insights and powerful conception of the depths of the relationship with the divine with this group. I just know people are going to love it. So thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for being with us.